Welcome to A State of Mind, the podcast that brings together consciousness, meditation, mindfulness, psychology, psychedelics, and so much more in pursuit of this mystery we call life. This is Julian Royce. Hello! We have a wonderful episode for you today. Before we get to that, I just wanted to make a quick announcement reminding everyone to hit the subscribe button on your podcast listening app. We have recently switched to a new hosting service. And I want to read a message from a listener, Jordana from Berlin. And that is my new favorite name, Jordana. She writes, "Thanks so much for producing a terrific and thought-provoking podcast." So thank you, Jordana. Today's conversation is really one of my personal favorites thus far on this podcast. It is with my friend Pierre Bouchard. He is a trauma-informed somatic therapist who specializes in Ketamine Assisted Psychotherapy. And we didn't talk about this in our conversation together, but I found out when I first met Pierre, like 5 years ago, that we both did the same study abroad program based in Bouchard, India. And this is a Buddhist studies program. It's about 5 months long, and Bodh Gaya, where this program takes place, where you actually live there, it's the place where the historical Buddha Shakyamuni is said to have reached enlightenment, sitting under the Bodhi tree. And in the Tibetan tradition, Shakyamuni Buddha is called the fourth Buddha of this fortunate eon, and that refers to the idea that in our time period here on this particular planet, there will be 1,000 Buddhas who appear to help us. So at least in the Tibetan tradition, it's interesting that it's understood that there are more than just one Buddha. So we both did this program. You know, you live there for 5 months, and there's monks and pilgrims coming from all over the world. And there's an actual tree there, the Bodhi tree, that is said to have been grown from a cutting of the original Bodhi tree that the Buddha sat underneath all those years ago. So in our conversation today, we talk about meditation and issues that can arise when we separate ourselves from our own experience, which is basically a mistake, in my opinion, in meditation practice, but we discuss how this can be a complex conversation. It really depends on how you define things like consciousness, awareness, and the witnessing awareness. We talk about ketamine and Pierre's work with Ketamine Assisted Psychotherapy and the definition of addiction. And we discuss trauma and the importance of working with the body and how being in touch with our somatic embodied experience is important, and it's an important way to heal trauma, especially when you do it with a skilled therapist. And we discuss how Pierre pointed out how ketamine can assist this process in part by leading to deeper and deeper levels of relaxation. So you're relaxing more and more while maintaining awareness. And we discuss the differences between therapy that uses strong psychedelic doses and psycholytic therapy. So psychedelic therapy is when you take a large amount of a substance. You have a full-blown experience. It can be very profound, life-changing. It can also be overwhelming. And psycholytic therapy utilizes a small amount of a psychedelic substance. So you can stay in connection and communication, and you can process what comes up for you in a more manageable way, usually. And I have a new favorite quote that came out of this conversation from Carl Jung, who said, "We must always be willing to do the next most necessary thing." And without further ado, I bring you Pierre Bouchard. And I'm here today with Pierre Bouchard. Pierre, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Great. And you are a therapist working in Boulder, Colorado?
I am, yeah. I'm a licensed therapist.
And you've been doing that for, 5 years?
6 now.
6 years?
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah.
Is it rewarding?
I was saying to a client I was seeing earlier today, they were asking me a little bit about the work, and I just said, I am built for this. This is the absolute best use of my time.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. So it feels like the really the best expression and use of what my creative gifts are. So yeah.
It feels like what you're meant to be doing.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. I've noticed a lot. I mean, I'm working as a therapist also, obviously, and with a lot of people I see, that question of purpose is so central. And it is often, I don't know if this is a general statement or if it just reflects the people that get attracted to me, but it's like so many other issues in their life come down to that, or like are related to that. Like, what is their purpose? What are they going to be doing? What do they want to be doing? And I think that's such a struggle at times in our culture, because we have this idea that we can live whatever life we want, we can create, live our dreams and all that, and it can be really challenging to feel like you're not living your dreams.
100%. There's a phrase that I think about a lot, that was one I heard when I was quite young from Carl Jung, which was that we must always be willing to do the next most necessary thing.
Oh, I like that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think about that in terms of figuring out what our purpose is, or what our purpose is for a time.
Right, it could change.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But that if we're not looking into that or aligned with that, we're going to be suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we're up to something quite good.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting that people, like, even if you have a lot of, like, a great life, you have a lot of money, you have everything you think you need, and you lack that sense of purpose, like how unsatisfying things can start to feel. And if you really have that sense of purpose, you could be like Mother Teresa, like how much difficulty and suffering she was dealing with every day, but she seemed kind of beatific, whatever that word is, like a saint. Like she was. It's so interesting that it seems like this central need that we have to feel like sense of meaning and belonging and purpose, and yet it's not one thing. It can change. It's something. It's hard to. You can't really grasp what that means, but we feel it when we're living it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or if we have a sense that we're aiming toward it.
Right. Yeah, and often that's all you can do. Yeah. So I invited you on partly because of your work with ketamine. So I thought I would just jump into that at the outset.
Great. Yeah.
But before we get into that, like, how did you come to be where you are today? Like, did you always see yourself as a therapist, or was it like a long journey to get here?
Yeah, I'm pausing just because I'm considering how far back do we go to answer this question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's let's see. I think I've known that I've wanted to be a therapist for a very long time. I figured that out quite early. I actually come from, my parents were therapists.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's like a family lineage.
It's a bit of one, yeah. And before they were therapists, my folks, actually, my mom was a Catholic nun.
Oh, really?
And my dad was a priest.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh, and they left their roles in the church to
that's right.
get married and
have a family.
Wow, amazing.
And so I mentioned that because I think what's important there is that, they left that, and then they became, they went to grad school and got into mental health in a different way. But I think they were committed to seeking, And so as a kid, that was really the highest value that was conveyed in the family. So
seeking.
No matter what, you should always be doing your own work. You should always be investigating who you are.
That's beautiful. You grew up with that value.
Yeah, quite unusual.
Yeah.
And
It's
so,
unusual.
yeah, and so that, I would say, that propelled me toward therapy at a young age.
Totally. Well, I can definitely imagine that having parents who are therapists would prepare you, hopefully in a good way, to also do that work because of the kinds of questions they might ask, the ways they would listen. Like therapy is such an embodied way of being. It's not something you leave at the office when you go home and
truly
get drunk and beat your wife or something. No, joke.
One would hope.
One would hope. I mean, it's just, for me, it's such a, whatever issue I'm struggling with in my life shows up when my clients will bring that up, and I'll be helping them with it, and then I'll realize I have to walk that walk myself.
Oh, yeah.
And that's happened so many times. It's amazing. That's the real gift of it, I think.
Truly. Whether you start working on something in your life, and then all of a sudden your clients are bringing that in their sessions. Yeah. It's kind of miraculous.
One of the gifts of that has been continually knocking down this false belief that, like, if there's some issue I have, like, I'm kind of alone with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a problem that so many people feel that way, and it kind of adds to whatever the issue already is. It adds this extra layer.
Truly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, anytime, as one of my teachers likes to say, we all got our ticket punched differently. Meaning, none of us had perfect childhoods. None of us had perfect parents, even if they gave us everything they had. And so we're always going to have had too much of some things and not enough of others. And so,
right. And
as kids, we just can't help but come to inaccurate conclusions about why things were the way they were.
Oh, interesting. That's a good point.
And that we definitely, as kids are just excellent at having very sort of self-centered reasons, right? So it's like if mom was a bit distant, a child's going to come up with this conclusion that, like, well, I must deserve that, right? In some way.
Something I did caused that.
Right.
Yeah, it's my fault. Right.
It's like, a child doesn't have the abstract thinking capacity to say, like, oh, mom's pretty overextended and she's giving me everything she's got, but I can tell right? It's like kids are great about making it about them, and so in that there's a deep loneliness, I think, that happens around certain wounds. Yeah. And I think the gift of good therapy in some ways is discovering or being reminded that no, we're all in this.
We're all in this.
We're all fumbling along, and these things that we think kind of alienate us are actually the things that make us more similar than anything else.
Totally, right. Yeah. They're actually the things that bring us together, that we have in common, and I think that's kind of part of why we love seeing celebrities like get their dirt exposed, or the tabloids and all that stuff. It's like, because we put them up on a pedestal and they're perfect and they have everything, and then we find out, oh no, they have this addiction problem, they have this relationship problem, they have this trauma from the past, and So I was going to ask, did you ever rebel against your parents for being therapists? Were you ever like, fuck therapy?
I think I guess so. I spent a few years after. So I studied psychology and Buddhist studies as an undergrad.
Oh, that's right.
And
where was that?
That was at Wheaton College. It's a tiny little school.
Cool.
Little liberal arts school in Massachusetts. And after that, I became a carpenter.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I decided to spend a few years, apprenticing as a carpenter, and as I got deeper into that, I got into farming and sustainable food, and I spent a few years doing that kind of work and learning a lot that way. And,
that's beautiful.
And at some point, I got tired of making $10 an hour and realized that as much as I liked all that, I liked talking to people more.
That's good.
So I eventually...
If you're a therapist, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I just yielded to the truth of that really just talking to people is what I'm best at and enjoy the most.
Yeah. So yeah, did you grow up Catholic then?
No, once my folks left the church, they left all that behind.
Yeah, well.
They had found Carl Jung and sort of archetypal psychology and all of that, and really that was sort of the foundation of the spirituality in the household. So I'd say I was raised with a very sort of Joseph Campbell
Oh, it's amazing.
sense of Christianity.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, Catholicism gets such a bad rap these days in general,
Yeah.
for some good reasons.
Yeah.
But it's curious to hear that. I think I have, my father's side of the family is Catholic, but he's completely non-religious. And then interestingly, my brother married someone who's Catholic. They had a very Catholic wedding, and they're raising their children with some Catholicism. And so it's just interesting how it runs through families, and it's so powerful. And I think in the world of psychology, like this idea of original sin and like blaming ourselves and guilt and shame often gets blamed on Catholicism in particular. It's like causes a lot of mental suffering. It's often not the healthiest, maybe never the healthiest attitude to like blame ourselves for things.
Yeah. I'm not sure how useful that is for us now.
Yeah.
And I think I'm by no means a theologian, and but I think there are a lot of really beautiful thinkers in that tradition that have really deep understandings of
Right.
humanity and existence. I mean, Richard Rohr comes to mind.
Right. Well, and
Stunning.
yeah.
A stunning understanding of
Totally.
and way of viewing the Catholic tradition.
It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
And I'm a religious studies major in undergrad as well, so I do appreciate that, that there are very deep, subtle, profound thinkers, throughout Christian history. And I bring it up partly, this is a whole other can of worms that we don't have to go into too much, but I've had a number of podcast episodes about Shambhala and the scandals with the leader, Sakyong, sexually abusing people, and how terrible that is. And there's also been all the scandals with Catholicism that we know about, like with priests and abusing people. But it's so clear to me that that doesn't mean everyone who's a practicing Catholic is a bad person. That would be ridiculous. And I think the same thing applies to the Shambhala tradition, to a lot of these organizations. And I just feel, I feel like it's worth pointing that out, because oftentimes the whole organization gets so tarred because of the leadership, which deserves a lot of criticism. That doesn't mean that there weren't well-intentioned people that are caught up in it, and then they're in a really tough situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, truly. It's quite a dilemma to be in then.
It really is, and it's just our world today. It's kind of hard to believe in anything sometimes because of all these scandals, because of all this corruption that we've seen. Yeah. Well, and then you went to Naropa, right? And that's how we met. We both went to school there.
Yeah. Yeah, so I went to Naropa and I studied contemplative psychotherapy, and as I was doing that, I got really interested in studying trauma, and somatic trauma work.
Right.
And
you did some meditation retreats in that area too, right? With Reggie Ray at Dharma Ocean.
Yeah, after graduating.
Okay.
I started getting serious about Reggie Ray's material. I'd been meditating since I was a teenager, and so over the years that has looked a lot. That my practice has looked a lot of ways, but I got really into somatic trauma work, and then that very much led me closer to Reggie Ray's material and studying embodiment and bringing that into a contemplative practice.
Do you want to share with our listeners a little bit about your meditation journey? Like when you say somatic, and that means basically feeling your body, right? Being in your body.
Yeah. Great.
Did you have like a meditation practice that was less embodied or not embodied, and then kind of discover how important the body is? Because that's me personally. Like when I was first starting meditating, like focusing on the breath or like trying to let go of thoughts and not realizing how disembodied I was.
Oh, entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was entirely me. and there's a lot of benefit to starting meditating as a teenager. And one of the downsides was not really having a teacher for a long time. And so there was years where I was just trial and error, and I think just instilled a lot of bad habits.
Then you have to unlearn those habits.
Yeah, which is actually a real pain in the ass. But I would say, one of those habits that I really picked up, that I see a lot of Buddhists get stuck with, is, I think there's such a focus on equanimity and not reacting.
Right.
Which is a beautiful and deep notion, but it's really easy for that, I think, to get subverted into actually blocking ourselves from what we are feeling. And that was definitely what I was doing for a long time.
Yeah, it can be so subtle.
Yeah.
And so when something comes up, you can kind of cut through it or see through it or kind of let it go. And you're kind of subtly pushing it away without realizing it.
Right.
Yeah, totally. Right. 100%.
Like training ourselves to witness our experience and actually not be with our experience or be in our experience so much.
Yeah, and you've kind of separated yourself from what's happening, and then you feel free, but then after a time, I think you feel less and less life force energy, because you're not really living your life. You're kind of removed from it, and I think that's a mistake. I don't think that's what the Buddha meant to teach.
Yeah.
But it's, I've definitely been there, and I see it in people. And I guess at its extreme end, it becomes like spiritual bypassing, where like whatever happens, you can just kind of bypass it.
Right.
And it does seem like some traditions and teachers basically do teach that. I mean, if you teach the whole world is an illusion and nothing, nothing's really real, you can see how you can go down that particular path. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how useful that is for us as modern people.
I don't think it's that useful either. And I think that there is just to finish my thought on it, there's a world of difference between fully feeling something and finding freedom within that, and like just passively witnessing everything and telling yourself that it's empty or that it doesn't matter, or that it's going to pass, or because you're blocking the feeling, you're blocking the experience. Yeah,
100%. What I have learned in as my own practice has developed over the last 19 years, and in my work as a psychotherapist, and as my training has deepened, and as I've developed into a ketamine therapist, and having done a lot of my own treatment in that way, more and more so, what seems crucial to me is actually allowing ourselves to be our experience.
Nice.
Like there's always I think, we have a capacity to witness our experience, and we can get a little too addicted to witnessing. Where it's actually like a lot more interesting, in my experience, to be moved by our experience than just witnessing it.
Yeah.
There's I think there's a way in which we're invited actually to sort of in a moment-to-moment way make love to phenomena, to be just right up against it, right up against our experience of sometimes we're sort of pressing into it, sometimes we are receiving it and letting it move us. And that's a lot more interesting than witnessing.
Do you think that the witness, like accessing that, I mean, that can have value as well?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely can. I just think it gets overused.
Right. In this moment, talking about it with you, it's like, I think when some meditation teachers talk about the witness, talk about awareness, like I think that doesn't contradict what you're saying necessarily, but it could be understood that way. I mean, it could be understood in the way of separating yourself from your experience. But it's just, it gets so subtle, and you really have to actually practice to be able to access the subtleties that this involves.
It's a long journey.
It's a long journey, yeah. And there's ups and downs, and there is a danger. There are dangers in meditation practice. Yeah. There's for me, I practice pretty much every day, and it's a commitment, and it's a journey, and it's kind of like, I mean, it definitely affects you. So if like I try to pay attention to my whole life and see what I need. rather than be too dogmatic or strict about what I'm doing. Because I think it could take some people out of balance. I mean, I worked at a place with people who had severe mental health issues like schizophrenia, and some of them had suffered schizophrenic breaks through doing intensive meditation, yoga, fasting, and man, boom, then next thing they know, they're in the hospital, and they've trying to put their mind back together. And so it can, maybe, and that's an extreme example, but I think some version of that could be true. I think that it deserves respect because it can be dangerous. And I think the same thing is true of psychedelics. So
no question.
Like 100%. Yeah.
No question. Yeah. It's not for everyone all the time.
Right. Yeah. It needs to be used with care and in the right way.
I like to think of, that there's an order of operations to any of these things too, where there may be a meditation practice that is really appropriate for you at one stage of life that outlives its usefulness.
Right, and then later maybe you need something different.
Time for it to shift, and it's a real shame, I think, when people get rigid in their practice and they're like, "This is what I do, this is it." And it's like, well, there's actually something in life that's wanting to unfold here. I think a bit more that we have to be a bit more responsive to, and it means which I think means it's so important to have a good teacher.
Right.
And also one that can be helping you track that. And maybe also has the flexibility of mind to recognize. Yeah. Also, the practice is going to shift.
A good teacher exactly, with the flexible mind. I mean, the Buddha, if we go back to the Buddha, like he was taught different things for different people. Like it's right there in his original teachings. And for some reason, that gets forgotten. But I would say to that, like my advice I've been giving people is like, a lot of big meditation teachers, they're wonderful to see, and it's like really good to go on retreat and have that experience, but they're not really available for one-on-one instruction. Yeah. And so I've sought out some people that I could just meet with one-on-one, and some of them I've paid, and I've worked with them for a period of time, and that's been helpful for me. And it's something that wasn't really offered by the big famous gurus, meditation people. So
yeah, it's been my experience as well.
Yeah.
Crucial. Yeah, I think it's really developing having good mentors in this way.
Yeah, it's worth seeking out.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, how did your interest in psychedelics? If we jump over to that subject, how did that develop? Did that come out of your meditation practice? You're exploring.
I kind of came to it later in life, actually.
Okay.
I mean, I had some early experiences with things in college,
right?
But I would say categorically they were just a kid trying stuff.
Right.
Which is very different. And so when I was studying working with trauma, one of my teachers in that ended up becoming one of the lead clinicians for phase 2 of the MDMA study that was being done by MAPS.
Cool. And here in Boulder?
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I just remember hearing his reports of what that looked like.
Cool.
And saying like, oh my gosh, this is totally blowing anything I've ever seen out of the water.
Yeah.
And so it started piquing my interest.
Interesting.
And within a few years, I would say, ketamine came on the radar. And I was able to do some sessions with my teacher.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Do a bit of an apprenticeship in that way.
See, that's been surprising to me that ketamine. I've never really heard about that when I was a kid. I don't have any experience with ketamine. It's one substance I've never actually done myself, and I want to, and I'm looking forward to that. But it always kind of surprises me that of all the psychedelics, that one's become used so much in therapy, and I understand that's because it's legal, right? That's the main reason, perhaps, or one of the reasons.
It's definitely one of the reasons, for sure.
Are there other advantages to ketamine that you see, over other substances?
Yeah, there's a couple. One being that it's short acting. So when people, there's a number of different ways to take ketamine, the routes of administration, and
isn't a injection one?
So you could do an intravenous, you could do an intramuscular dose, you could take a lozenge and have it
Oh, really?
absorb in your mouth. Those are really the sort of the three most common ones that are used therapeutically. But plenty of people party by snorting it.
Right, that's more the party version.
That would be one of the party versions for sure. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to take ketamine. The one that I use in my practice is lozenges, which is it's a lower dose than the intramuscular dose, which is quite high.
And they get a prescription for it, right?
That's right.
That's amazing.
They'll get a prescription from a psychiatrist.
And what would the prescription be for? Like something like depression?
Yeah, depression, PTSD, that kind of thing. And so they'll come to the office and they have the prescription. This is something that their doctor prescribes for them that they can pick up from a pharmacy.
And then it's like their choice to take it with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Basically, okay.
Yeah, and so they lay on the couch and they take a dose of this, and they swish it around in their mouth for 10 to 15 minutes, and it absorbs through the mucous membranes. Okay. And start to finish, those sessions are 3 hours long.
Wow.
And so, that's considerably more manageable than 6 hours or longer with, psilocybin or, LSD could be.
So it could be like 12 hours.
Quite long.
For some people, maybe it goes on forever. So yeah, 3 hours. So in 3 hours, they're back more or less to where they started in terms of functioning.
That's right.
Okay.
Definitely don't recommend anyone drive afterwards.
Okay.
But they're pretty much back.
Cool.
Yeah, and so that's a really there's a lot of advantage to having that, right? Yeah. Like that's something you can do in an afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And
I imagine it provides. 3 hours is maybe that's like a great length of time because you could focus and really have attention for a period of time. Whereas like 6 hours, like you're going to need, as a therapist, you're going to need breaks. You're going to need to go to the bathroom. There's going to be an ebb and flow there. But maybe for 3 hours there can be more of a focus. Is there often like a specific intention that goes into it, or is it more general?
I would say it really depends on the client, and it depends on where they are in their journey. I would say that the way that I work with people, some people will do, packages where they'll do, say, 4 to 6 sessions, and they'll try and do a piece of work. I find that when you're doing psycholytic psychotherapy, meaning you're doing psychedelic medicines at a dose where someone's able to really talk and relate and kind of work with their own psychology.
Can you say that word again?
Psycholytic.
Psycholytic. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
a lower dose.
It's a lower dose where you're sort of in a working psychological window versus psychedelic, which would be above that, where it's sort of encountering more sort of transpersonal material. Where there's a lot less talking, there's more of just like being with the experience.
Right.
It'd be a bit overwhelming. Or
so imagine in that case, the role of the therapist would be more just holding space, making sure they're safe and comfortable and being there if they're needed, but maybe less active intervention. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. And so people will have intentions. Often, I would say what I find often is that early and what I was trying to say earlier was that I really like to do a longer, more ongoing work with people with ketamine.
So it's not like a one-time thing.
It's not a one-time thing, and I think most of the time it's not even a 6-time thing. It's more like 10 to 20 times. Over 6 months, over a year. And that it's the repeated accessing of this territory and accessing their mind. Each time you do something like this, something opens, something gets worked, and then each time there's an iterative process to that. And so, whereas in the beginning it may be like, okay, there's this thing I really want to work on, and I think we're going to do this. And after a time, there's just sort of like, I just trust the process. I don't know what's going to come up today, but I know that I'm capable. This is the client speaking. I know I'm capable of just being with whatever comes up.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And so then we're just
building confidence.
They are.
Yeah, and there's also like this trust in your own process, your own life, because so many times, people have something like, I feel anxious, I have anxiety attacks, like, fix me.
Yeah.
It's like, it just doesn't, it's not how our life works.
Yeah, no kidding. As if we could. And I think, and so for me, somatic work really ties in so well with this because to me, somatic work is also when you're tuning into the body, you're tuning into a thing that really doesn't give a shit what your preferences are. Your body doesn't care.
Right.
Your body has a far more objective view of the situation than our minds do. And I don't know about you, but I can convince myself of just about anything.
Yeah.
But
that's fair. That's a good point.
But if I tune into my body, there is a clear sense.
There's a truth there, and
yeah.
It's always in the present moment.
Yeah.
And it's something that you can feel. It's not just something you're thinking about. But I do wonder, because I've heard that before, like the body never lies, or some saying like that.
Yeah.
And I get that, but I also think that sometimes I'm walking along and I see something and my body, I stop, I get startled, I think it's a snake, oh, it's just a rope.
Right.
Well, so then my body was for sure it thought maybe, it got ready to run or whatever, but it, it wasn't objectively true, it wasn't a snake there. So I think the body doesn't always, I think that the mind-body connection is so deep that you could have a false belief that your body then is communicating also. So it's not necessarily true.
Well, and that's what we see in trauma all the time.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah.
What's objective is your experience.
Right.
It's not objective about the world.
Right, it's your experience.
But it is objective about your experience.
Nice.
So you perceive the rope as a snake, and the body responds accordingly. There's an objective truth to the response.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And so, I would say that, the work of any good trauma therapy, right, is being able to pull those things apart, right? What was a rope? What was a snake? And in trauma, things happen too quickly for us to actually have a chance to respond to them in a way we'd like to, or we had no chance to respond at all.
And that's part of what makes it traumatic, right?
It is.
It's like an overwhelming thing.
Like trauma is an overwhelm of the system, right? And so in trauma therapy, one of the things we're doing is giving the nervous system a chance to complete what it didn't get to complete when the event initially happened.
Right.
Whether it was getting to brace and protect oneself from a car accident, or getting to fight back from being assaulted in some way. Or, on a more developmental layer, as a child, right? Like getting to receive nourishment or to reach out for support when that wasn't available. It's, all of these things we would qualify as trauma in very different ways. And so it's like giving the nervous system a chance, and the body and our minds a chance to complete and integrate what didn't get to happen.
It's like these things get stored inside us and they're still alive, kind of, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they end up running our lives.
I appreciate your speaking about this so clearly, because it's a tricky subject, trauma and how to work with it. And I really appreciate, I think, something unique about you that you're bringing to your work is the somatic meditation. And that is, I see that, as a way of working through doing some of this process you just described on your own, like when you're sitting, right? Like that could be another way to access some of this.
Well, it's definitely a way to start tuning into what is there. Like we can't change what we're up to until we know what we're up to. And I think one of the geniuses of Reggie Ray and the way he taught about somatic meditation was that a body that's tight is a body that can't feel much.
That's a good saying too.
A contracted muscle doesn't actually have much blood flow to it, so it's not actually going to register a ton of sensation.
Yeah.
Right, and so
like the stiffness, the tightness, the holding on, the bracing.
That's it.
On an unconscious level.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so we have to get clued into that's happening, and the only way we can do that is by having some contrast, by having times where we actually have deep bodily relaxation. And so it's like if we have a experiential reference point for relaxation, we're going to notice tightness a lot more, and it's going to help us start to orient more toward relaxation. If it's all steady state tension, we don't even know what we're missing.
Right.
which was one of the frustrating things of finding somatic meditation, I don't know, 12 to 14 years after I started meditating. I feel like in some ways I had to start all over.
Totally, yeah. I do remember going on meditation retreats and having so much tension and pain, like, because I was sitting too stiffly, actually, and I wasn't dropping into my body and deeply relaxing and practicing from that place. And so, yeah, it's I think, I think that's something so important, that stiffness, that muscle tightness, and then being aware of it. And then if we're holding all that kind of tension for so long, of course you're going to have back pain. Of course you're going to have headaches and tension and trouble sleeping at night and all these more surface level things that we will complain about because they suck. They might be coming from like our muscles like gripping too tight throughout the day. Right? Yeah. I think caffeine can play a role in that. If you're doing too much caffeine, stress, anxiety, obviously don't help. So yeah,
truly, and that there are so many layers to this, right? Like, I think like what you've just described is a deep truth that we end up seeing on just deeper and deeper levels of how one relates to their own existence, right? Like, I could be clenching my butt right now as I sit to maintain a certain level of uprightness. But if we go down to a deep enough layer, which luckily something like psychedelics is helping us access, is that like I actually might be white knuckling my existence to some degree.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I might be, and totally unconsciously, like assuming like if I'm not holding on some deep fundamental level, I will be totally annihilated. And this is what we start to see. There's research that's sort of showing, high dose psilocybin sessions for people who are terminally ill can help them work with just this, and help them prepare for their upcoming death,
right?
And have a lot less anxiety around their death. And I think this is part of it. And we're talking about a fundamental dynamic of struggling and holding on versus letting go and trusting our experience.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Struggling and holding on versus letting go. Letting go of control. That's so hard for so many of us.
No kidding. Maybe all of us. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe that's just the human condition.
Yeah.
I love that you're bringing psychedelics into this, and that maybe ketamine in particular, can help with the relaxation and getting in touch with what does it feel to be really relaxed, and then being able to carry that as a reference point.
Very much. And I don't do it in my practice, but I would say this would be my plug for IM, intramuscular doses where people are approaching something closer to an ego death experience.
So that would be more psychedelic, more.
It would, yeah, and that's going to give people a chance to sort of relate at that level of, am I holding on, or can I trust this experience?
Can I trust? Can I let go?
Yeah.
And then that's so profound when we think about our death and how that must be. That's the time to really let go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think being able to, I don't know. I can't say who said this, right? But it seems like there's a lot of, especially Tibetan Buddhist practice seems very much about preparing us for our death. I'm sure you could speak to that more. Yeah,
I actually just had a memory come up of when I was on retreat with Reggie Ray. Probably, I think it must have been 10 years ago, 10 years ago, and he was talking about exactly this and how it's all about preparing for the moment of death and total letting go of control, that our ego, our sense of holding on to a self as a kind of contraction, and that's what needs to be relaxed. And he told this kind of heartbreaking story of a longtime Buddhist meditator that he'd known for years or decades, and how at the moment of their death they were forcing themselves to sit up straight in meditation posture, and they were struggling a lot, and he said it was like a really hard death, and they weren't able to just relax, to let go. This was his telling of it.
Yeah.
It was an amazing story. He's a very powerful teacher. So yeah.
Yeah. My mother was a hospice social worker for 20 to 25 years. And I remember her some years ago telling me the story of one of her clients who, wealthy woman, badass woman who ran shit, just a force to be reckoned with, very powerful. And as she approached her own death, just utterly terrified. This was someone who'd gotten through life well by being in control.
Right.
And here they were in an utterly unmanageable situation where you can't control. And it was she just suffered very intensely and had, I think, a very uncomfortable death.
Wow. Yeah, it's another powerful story. I think it's good to hear a story like that and reflect that we're all going to die, and it's something that we can actually prepare for.
Yeah.
Even just thinking about it a little bit.
It is. And I think this is where psychedelic psychotherapy actually gives us some deep practice into it.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, just one last thought to close this loop. I think part of Reggie Ray's point in that story is like the Buddhist tradition sometimes makes such a big deal about death that it's almost counterproductive, because then you're like, that guy was struggling to sit up in the right posture and do the right practice, and that's could actually be missing the point. So
right.
Just wanted to offer that.
Definitely, and I think that very much kind of goes back to what we were talking about, whether, is this practice right at all times, or is this
right?
Exactly. Whereas actually laying
down,
as if he was incapable of being mindful while laying down.
Right. Yeah, I just had this little conversation with someone the other day, and I was talking about trying to stay awake while relaxing, and being lucid and maintaining awareness, and they were like, I think that's like a little bit of meditation propaganda that goes too far. Like, I've had some of my most powerful experiences letting myself fall asleep and then being in the dream state. And I was like, oh, that's a good point.
I like that. Well, and something else I see, as a trauma therapist too, that when we're working with trauma, we're sort of, one way of describing it is that we're moving away from that which wasn't great. We're less consumed by a wound. We're less consumed by something bad. But something that doesn't get talked about, I think, nearly enough is, what are we moving toward?
Oh yeah.
Right. What is it that actually helps us live a good life?
Right.
And as we're doing that work, I think it depending on how you're working, I think this is very much where psychotherapy and spirituality get a bit blended. I'm thinking of spirituality as one of the tools, at least, that help us live a good life.
Yeah.
And in that, I think we actually have to stretch our nervous system to tolerate more relaxation, to tolerate more pleasure.
Yes. Yeah, I love that you're bringing that in. Yeah, absolutely. Like, if we don't really know what health and well-being feels like, then we can mistrust it. We
definitely can. And I think, I had a very similar experience of, for years when I was doing laying down meditation practice, I just fall right asleep. And there's actually, I think, a stretching and a growing of capacity of the nervous system to tolerate relaxation while staying lucid.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think falling asleep, letting yourself sleep is actually so healing. And I've only really started to appreciate this more recently. And so many times when I see a client, I started asking this. I'm like, how's your sleep?
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, oh, it's terrible. Oh, last night I woke up 3 or 4 times. I tried to go to bed at 11. I didn't fall asleep till 2. Someone's really in a kind of crisis mode of their sleep. I mean, it's so fundamental.
Absolutely. So, yeah, it's a huge part of living a decent life.
Yeah, easy to forget about. So you really see psychedelics as helping people open up some of these doors, like with ketamine, like the body relaxation, even like experiences of ego death are possible.
Yeah, quite so.
Is there an addiction danger that you see?
There can be.
Yeah.
I'd say people can get addicted to ketamine. there is a physical addiction that can happen if it is used too frequently.
Oh, interesting.
So that's something to be careful about. And more so, I would say that people can get addicted to just about anything. Anything that's going to help someone avoid their experience, you can get addicted to.
Totally, like the phone, the this, the that.
Phone, porn, gambling, substances. It almost doesn't matter. It's like whatever helps me disconnect from what's happening here that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We can get addicted to. And so, I mean, one, I would say it's too expensive to do that with ketamine therapy.
They're getting the prescription and then they're also paying you.
Yeah, they're paying me, which is not cheap for my time. But I would say that, the difference here, right, and this is a difference of it has nothing to do with the substance here. I would say it has everything to do with the approach, which is that you can use something to distance from your experience or move closer to it and know it more intimately.
It's beautiful. So maybe that could be a definition of addiction versus non-addiction. I wish I had a better word than non-addiction, but I'm not sure what. Yeah, not avoiding your experience. And I think maybe this would be a little controversial to say or complicates the picture, but it's not like just because a drug is a prescription, it's not addictive. Like if we look at some of the antidepressants
or benzos or painkillers,
if you're taking it and you have to taper off of it and there's all these side effects and withdrawal, I mean, isn't that's the definition of addiction too? So I think we need to be more honest about some of these things.
Yeah, or nuanced.
More nuanced. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of nuances there, and people don't tend to crave their antidepressant medication, but your system adjusts to that reality, and then you need that to feel normal after a while. And that could be great for some people. That could be really helpful.
Yeah. I would say it's 100% helpful for some people. Yeah. I think it gets overused. I think psychiatrists overprescribe.
Right.
And, for a long time, it's been the best tool we've had. I think we're coming into a time where we have better tools.
That's exciting.
I think I think ketamine is leading the way, and I think, MDMA is going to be legalized in the next couple of years, hopefully, if it passes the phase 3 trial, which it looks like it's going to.
Yeah.
For treating PTSD and probably a whole host of other things at some point. So
when do you think that might be legal?
From what I'm seeing from MAPS, is that they're expecting that to be rescheduled from a Schedule 1 to either a Schedule 2 or 3, I don't recall, in 2022.
Oh, wow.
So it's really just right around the corner.
Beautiful.
So I think, we're looking at a fundamental paradigm shift in how we're considering mental health and how we're treating mental health. And that we can really be moving from a time where we've been treating symptoms with antidepressants and benzos and these other things, moving from treating symptoms to really healing the root causes of these things that are creating trouble.
It's so exciting. I really admire the work that you're doing. It sounds so powerful. And I guess, do you see trauma, for lack of a better word, is almost always part of the root causes? Or is there maybe that could be a definition of trauma? Or are there some, I don't know, are there other things that would cause lifelong mental health problems?
I mean, I think we can't rule out genetics. We can't rule out wacky environmental contaminants. I mean, shoot, I think from what we're learning about the gut-brain connection, I think there's a lot of things. There's a lot of factors. So I don't want to paint too broad of a brush here.
Yeah, I think that's an honest answer. There could just be a physiological thing that if it shifted, you could all of a sudden your depression might lift. That's possible.
Quite so, I think. And I mean, there are different mental health, air quotes, mental health conditions that seem like actually, if someone has the right balance of minerals, they go away. right? Or if someone has a thyroid disorder, that can lead to psychosis, right? So
That's so fascinating.
It is, and so this is an extremely complex thing. I would say though that I tend to hold a clinical belief that a lot of the root causes of what gets us in trouble in our lives that is psychological, we can classify as a trauma. Now that really depends on how we're defining trauma here, which is in the broadest sense, right? Like we have to look so much broader than an assault or a wartime experience. We have to look. We're basically having to look at this as broad as possible, and to do so, I think the way we can talk about that is any stressful, overwhelming experience that gets coded into our nervous system and shapes our view of the world.
I like that. It gets coded into our nervous system. It becomes, that's that quality of still being alive in some sense. You're still being active still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and the thing is, I think a lot of times in trauma, we think about the things that happened that shouldn't have, right? The assaults, the car accidents, everything else. What we don't talk about, and this is more sort of a developmental trauma and sort of leads more to like a complex PTSD, is the things that didn't happen that should have. Having a parent that was delighted by your sheer existence, having consistent caretaking, these sins of omission, so to speak.
Right. There's just been fascinating and heartbreaking studies about the importance of a caregiver when you're a child.
It's everything.
So having an attentive, attuned person caring for you.
It's as essential as food.
That's a great message to share.
And so, our minds are very creative. We're very adaptive creatures. We're gonna find a way to deal with what we're given.
Yeah.
And
and part of what you're saying, if you don't have a caretaker like that, there's still healing that can happen. It's not like you're cursed for the rest of your life.
No, and it's true. It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about in good trauma therapy, we're helping someone have a missing experience or complete something they didn't get to complete.
Nice.
And that if someone didn't have a parent who was delighted in their sheer existence, there's a way in which they can get, it's not the same, but there is a way that they can receive that to a degree with a loving therapist.
The therapist could help, and then they could learn how to have that in partnership and friendship.
Yeah, right. And then that can get sort of put together later in life.
Nice.
So I'd say it's a very optimistic message.
Yeah.
I think, none of us are set in stone. We're finding more current neuroscience research is really showing that the brain is malleable up until death.
So, I love that. I think that's so true and so amazing. The plasticity, the malleability.
Yeah. And what we do know is that psychedelics actually help increase that, right? So when we're young, the brain is malleable. And the older we get, the more rigid it gets. And so for people in midlife and beyond, actually some psychedelics can be very helpful for reintroducing a little more flexibility in the mind.
Totally.
To have a new experience.
Right.
Make some new neural pathways.
Yeah. Well, and one way to talk about that would be openness, right? Like
yes.
Increasing the openness. And I think some people, maybe this is more common if you're really young and you take strong psychedelics, you're blasted too open and you get a little fractured and you have to ground yourself. You have to come back. You have to.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing, that quality of openness. And I think, for sure, psychedelics increase the openness in someone's personality. And there's a danger in leading to excess. I mean, this is like a bigger societal point. Like if psychedelics are becoming more accepted and more mainstream, I'm concerned that there will be excesses and then another backlash against them, like what happened in the 60s. You become so open and everything is groovy or whatever. There's going to be this puritanical backlash against it. So I hope this time around, and I think it is, like organizations like MAPS and the scientific studies and bringing it into therapy, it's like a way of really honoring these medicines, using them in the best way that we can.
Yeah, it's definitely a more measured rollout than
Timothy Leary.
than Leary's acid tests.
Right. And I appreciated the point you made about living a happier, just better life overall. Because something my mom asked us, she's like, well, if you don't have PTSD, you don't have a big trauma, then you don't need to take MDMA, even if it becomes legal. Mm-hmm. And I think that could be a bit of a shame. I think I would love to see a world where psilocybin could be offered to anyone who's nearing the death process, or anyone who just is ready to have a transformative experience. It doesn't need to be because you got assaulted or this terrible thing happened that
right.
Well,
right, which is a really interesting discussion about how we are approaching healing and what healing is, right? And we're using a very pathological medical model, right? There's something wrong that needs to be fixed.
Right.
And in some ways, I can really get behind that, because this is if this is the Trojan horse approach that allows us, allows psychedelics to become mainstream, I think that's going to be by far not positive. But what we're going to need to have a conversation about, that you're pointing to, is what about, the classic phrases, so there's doing this for treatment of a malady, but then there's also, using this as the betterment of well people.
That's a nice phrase. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's not something we really understand well at this point, in terms of how to speak about that. How do we fit that into our current diagnostic model?
Yeah, we need that. We need this we need to have this conversation as a society, right? As a culture. What is a life well lived? Is Jeff Bezos our supreme role model? Is there something?
I sure hope not.
If we look at other cultures, we have people like the Dalai Lama. Maybe he's a better role model. There's other models we can look at. We can expand our understanding of what a good life is beyond just acquiring as much money as possible.
Yeah.
But for some reason in America, we just keep going back to that. That's the thing I think it's the thing that could end up, I hate to say this, destroying our country, right? This grasping, this greed, everyone's excuse for why they're doing messed up things is money, right?
Yeah, I think we're actually at a really critical point. I think we're culturally being confronted with this in such a deep way, and I think really actually the pandemic is showing that. And that we've done a beautiful job of fetishizing a handful of billionaires, and I'm not sure it's the way forward for us.
No, I'm not sure. They just had the 4 top tech billionaires go before Congress. Was it Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and Google? And those 4 companies made something like $26 billion in the last quarter, while the rest of the economy was tanking. So this pandemic has really just accelerated these trends that were already happening.
Yeah.
Amazon was already so dominant, but now it's just, so that's a whole other topic, but I think it relates because we're just touching on the fundamental values of our culture.
Truly, and this is a larger conversation about what is it to actually live a good life.
Right.
Right, and we really are up against that in a big way, and
Yeah, I've heard a lot of talk in the psychedelic community around trying, as these things become more acceptable and legalized, not letting giant corporations run the show. Really keeping it more local, more genuine. The focus on healing, not on making money from them. But it's an important part of the conversation.
It is, and it really remains to be seen. And I think it's a really tricky one, and I think there's a certain amount of neoliberal, late capitalist horseshit that is going to be completely inescapable from infiltrating the psychedelic industry and world. I think we're already starting to see it around psilocybin. There's a lot
interesting
moving in the background there that I'm not nearly well educated on enough. But if it's happening here in our culture now, that's going to be part of it.
Right.
And we're going to be asked to continue to relate to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I heard, and I don't know the details of this or the total facts of it, but the corporations have been filing like patents on some of the DNA or the strands of psilocybin, like ways that they could patent something like that. And so hopefully that won't happen, but yeah.
I think we can count on it happening. I think we're going to have to count on some sort of counterforce moving in a different direction.
Right. Okay, yeah.
It remains to be seen what that is. I'm sure there's plenty of people having conversations about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think just the fact that these psilocybin mushrooms grow all over the world and the spores are in the air, there's a certain force like within that to kind of equalize it. So, that's partly why they're still around. Like they can't really get rid of them, no matter how illegal we try. They're going to keep popping up in cow shit.
Yeah, we can trust that.
So, well, it's been great having you on the podcast. Really appreciate it. I think you're doing wonderful work, and I think it's really deep work and really needed.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have found this podcast valuable, there are many ways in which you can support it. You can share it with friends and on your social media. You can leave us a review on your favorite podcast listening app. And you can visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/astateofmind. For show notes and more information unique to each episode, visit astateofmindplay.com. And to learn more about my work as a therapist, meditation teacher, and coach, visit julianocean.us. And please don't hesitate to send me a message or email and let me know what you think and contribute to our conversation. Thank you so much for your support. It is listeners like you that make all this so very much worthwhile.